to our series on grief. In partnership with Gabby Jimenez of the Hospice Heart, we're featuring social workers Isabel Stenzel and Lisa Paul of the Death Deck in discussions on grief and grieving and how to manage it. You're listening to Heartbeat from the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer here with Jerry Tinter.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. Because we know how busy life can get, Heartbeat is designed to give you helpful information in a bite-sized format. Well, Helen, this is going to be our first episode with one of our subject matter experts.
And she's a return guest, actually, Isabel Stenzel.
Yeah, that's right. This is not her first time to be with us on the podcast, so we're glad to have her here. So Isabel is a grief counselor, actually a bereavement social worker, and she's going to be our subject matter expert today. And so we're very glad to have her here on the podcast to talk about grief and when to ask for help. And so Gabby is also here with us. Gabby, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for being here, Isabel. We're grateful for the time that you're sharing with us and some insight and some tools so that maybe we can reach out to others and help them through difficult times. I think we'll just kind of start diving in, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
One of the things that I have noticed is, so when someone has to say goodbye to someone they love, there is grief. And there's so many steps to navigate that. But there's also anticipatory grief. There's the feelings of what is coming up, and that is heavy grief too. I'm just going to ask you the big question. When is it the best time for someone to seek professional help?
Yes, that is such a good question. I'm so glad we're having a conversation about this. To clarify for the audience, to give some guidelines around when they need to seek some support. So number one, I would say that whenever the person who is grieving feels like they need extra support, that's the simple answer. Grief is a form of stress, an intense form of stress. And anytime we're stressed, we sort of cultivate our coping skills, but sometimes the stress overwhelms our coping. And we need additional support and guidance. So anytime a griever needs support, they have the right to go seek it out and look for it. So that's my very simple answer. But also to that is we know that grief is a normal and natural experience in life. We grieve all the time, small losses throughout our lives. And most of the time we can cope with those. We can cope with the change and the stress around it. But we also know that grief after the death of a loved one is one of life's hardest experiences. And so sometimes that stress and that pain and sorrow overwhelms a person. And so they feel like they could benefit from extra support. I say that keeping in mind that, for tens of thousands of years, human beings have been coping and adapting to grief. And so we do have this intrinsic internal capacity to be able to cope with loss. But our societies are changing and evolving, and many of us don't live in sort of clans or tribes like we used to. So another answer to that question is to find support when you're feeling isolated, when you're feeling like you don't have enough support. And there's quality and quantity of friends. We can have many, many friends in our lives, but if we don't have that one friend or family member that we feel like we can really open up to and be authentic about our sorrow and our hurt, then talking to a therapist, a grief counselor, could be that person. So as our culture in America, sometimes it does help to have that one person that you can turn to really express your feelings. A couple other things I want to mention is, it can be so helpful to have someone professional in order to focus your grief and honor your grief in a set amount of time. And then set it aside and try to go on and function in the rest of your life, your work, your family. And so sometimes in our culture, we get 3 days of bereavement leave, right? And then we're forced to go on to work. And sometimes having a professional support person helps us carry that compartmentalization a little bit better. So that's another reason to seek out support.
I'm going to say, kind of in that same line, obviously I work in hospice, so I am aware of what the social workers and the bereavement team do. As you know, I'm currently going through something with a family member, and so I'm experiencing anticipatory grief. Like I'm preparing for that. And I reached out to one of the social workers that I work with, and I've never done this before. And I really, even though I tell others how to do it, I found myself almost at a loss because suddenly it was mine and I didn't know what to do. So I reached out to a social worker.
Good.
And it was so therapeutic because I was able to express my weakness and vulnerabilities. Like I felt like I could say whatever I needed to safely, but also she helped me almost put it into sort of an order of things to focus on and validated my feelings. And I guess until you're going through it yourself, do you really have any idea what it feels like? And anticipatory, I have lost family members, but anticipatory grief is a real thing.
Yes, absolutely. It is very intense. I think sometimes therapy or counseling can be more helpful in the anticipatory grief period because it can be so incredibly stressful and there's so much uncertainty ahead. And I appreciate what you're saying, Gabby, of just how important it is to, even as healthcare professionals, as caregivers, people like us who tend to be giving to others, to also have the capacity to stop and receive and reach out for the support and express our own grief. I mean, the beauty of this work in hospice is that we are living our own lives as well as witnessing everybody else's lives, and there is intersection. So I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you sought out some support. I also wanted to touch upon perhaps when do you seek out support? We all know that we have our own capacity. We can feel the stress and the grief bubbling, and we know when we're kind of at the brink of overload and it would be helpful to talk to someone. But I also want to talk about when after someone dies, when is the right time to seek support? Would it be okay if I talk about that?
That would be wonderful because I think that's when people do question it. Like, is it too soon? Do I wait a while? Is that too late? And I don't think people many people think that grief is right here, but you and I, all of us out here know that grief lasts forever. So yes, this is a very good segue topic.
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
So when to look for support? I, as a mental health professional, I trust the client in front of me. And so I trust that each of us knows when we need the support. Some may call us one day after the death of their loved one. For them, they're ready. But in general, often right after the death of a loved one, there's a sense of shock. There's a sense of disbelief. Wow, what just happened? A sense of exhaustion after the caregiving. And sometimes it's not the best time for emotional processing. It's certainly time for psychological first aid and kind of rallying the support systems and offering, kind of a checklist of the things that need to be done and giving the person confidence that they can get through the early days of loss. But sometimes the stressors around making decisions, the logistics of funerals and financial issues and all of that can be so overwhelming that the emotional catharsis, the benefit of counseling can actually be greater, maybe 1 or 2 months after the death. That being said, again, I truly believe everybody knows what they need. And then I also feel like there's really no sort of endpoint. Anyone can look for grief support at any point in time in the future. It's not like if a year has passed, okay, you're supposed to be done. You shouldn't be looking for grief support after a year. Absolutely not. We have people who have lost a parent when they were 5 years old and they're 60 now, and they're trying to process the death of their parent 55 years later. And that's all okay. And that makes sense. One thing I want to keep in mind, most importantly, I want to add to that statement before I go on. I want to emphasize how important it is to trust one's instinct, to trust that you know what you need And we also have to juggle life. So if you're a parent who has just lost your spouse, sometimes you have to go in survival mode and you cannot address your grief needs. If you're dealing with the selling of a house or moving or major financial changes after the death of a loved one, we have to focus on survival first. And then the emotional and psychological needs come later. So trust that your process will unfold the way it needs to, and that you have the strength to cope with the immediate needs and can address the other issues later in time. I do want to emphasize that when it comes to seeking support for grief, there's a very small number of people who are grieving that may get stuck, meaning their grief doesn't start, stop, or move. And we call that complicated grief or prolonged grief. And for those people, we don't put a label on grief until at least 1 year out, maybe even 2 years out for people with sudden loss. So I want to emphasize that I think people who feel like their grief is not moving, or that they are stuck somehow, somewhere, that they're overwhelmed by longing and preoccupation of the person who died. They can't enjoy anything. They have, need to avoid any reminders of the loss. They have difficulty staying in the present moment in this world, in their current reality. Sometimes those are the signs and symptoms of prolonged grief disorder. And so it's a real thing. It's a little controversial because we also know grief takes the time it takes. If you've had a sudden or traumatic or untimely death of a loved one, it will take longer to cope. But prolonged grief disorder is when a person feels that they're stuck, that something isn't right. And usually it's the person grieving that can identify something's not quite right. It is not a good idea to seek grief support when someone else is telling you to do so. We have to go to grief counseling because we feel we need it. I just want to put that plug in.
So, Isabel, I have a question that just comes to my mind. When someone finally decides that they need more support than what they have, where would they first want to go to find that support? Where should they begin seeking support? Should they go to their doctor? Where is the best person to go to when they realize that they need some help with their grief process?
That's a really good question. I think, yes, number one, to talk to a primary care doctor or a trusted medical or mental health professional. Often our primary care doctors can point us in the right direction to see where we can seek support. And then we have support at our fingertips. The internet is a great resource. Most people don't know that grief support is available at almost every hospice, mostly the nonprofit hospices, but that many hospices offer support groups and individual counseling, or they have a resource list of private therapists that we can turn to.
I've actually said this to people, and I just want to confirm that it's true, that many hospices, even if your loved one was not on hospice, they do offer free services sometimes to community members. Could someone just reach out to their local hospice and even if their loved one was not on it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And every hospice is different. So some hospices don't have groups or individual grief counseling. Some hospices, we've noticed a trend where for-profit hospices will refer all of their grieving clients to nonprofit hospices who tend to have a lot of these services. So absolutely, all of where I work, Mission Hospice, our support groups are open to the public, all free of charge. Individual counseling is offered with a sliding scale fee to the community members. There's also, the funeral homes offer resources as well. In the case of a traumatic or violent death, the county mental health crisis teams offer referrals. The police department have a list of mental health resources. Clergy, faith centers have many resources for counseling. Schools also have school counselors for children and teens who need grief support. So there's quite a few resources out there. It's just a matter of looking for the right place. I'm just going to throw this out there. This is always a resource I use, psychologytoday.com. Again, psychologytoday.com is a listing of therapists who take specific insurance or who focus on certain issues, and you can click on grief and then get a list of your local therapists that focus on grief.
Wow. The resources alone are going to be so helpful. Thank you. As we close out this segment, I want to talk about something. Maybe it's because of my own curiosity, but I have heard about the class that you facilitate, which is a writing course. And I know it is relative to grief, but could you tell us a little bit about that and maybe offer that suggestion to others in a way to perhaps help them work through their own?
Yes, thank you, Gabby. The Writing Through Loss group is one of my favorite parts of my job. I sort of joke that writing is the cheapest form of therapy. And so for those of you who aren't ready for professional support, your journal can be your counselor. And I say this with a little grain of salt, because clearly if you have deep, intense mental health issues and, grief that impairs your functioning and serious depression and anxiety, writing may not be enough. I think therapy is more important. But writing in your journal can be tremendously powerful to be able to document what happened, what you saw, what you feel, where you are now. We do not have control over what happens to our loved ones and who dies in our life, but we do have control over how we tell the story. And so our perspective today can change over time. And so we get this gift of being able to tell the story with a different lens every time we put our pen on the paper. So writing can help us change our perspective, help us understand what happens, help us, cathart, meaning get the emotions out of us and onto the page. Writing can help us see our loved ones in a different way. Writing helps us connect to our loved ones when we write a letter to them. So it can be tremendously powerful. I have seen people who are in the depths of sorrow, and the more they write, the more focused in life they become. So sometimes it can be a simple prompt, like, what did your loved one like most? It's a way for us to connect to our person who died. So my writing groups focus on three things: that continuing relationship with the person who died, the grief experience itself. What are you feeling? What are you noticing? How are you growing from this loss? And then the third thing is the change in who you are, your sense of self. Now that you don't have a spouse, or you have a spouse who died, now that you lost your parent, who are you now? How is your life changing? So all of those things are really important as one grows and moves through this grief period, for self-awareness, for insight. Yeah. And another part of my writing group that is so powerful is that people read out loud what they've written. And there's something tremendously satisfying about being heard and being listened to and validated. And even hearing one's own voice say these words out loud means it's true. And so again, that itself shifts some kind of pain into meaning, into purpose. I definitely a huge advocate for anyone who wants to write. There are many resources on the internet for writing, but certainly through this website, you're welcome to post and ask questions if you need additional resources for writing through healing.
Isabel, I just want to reach through the screen and come over to you right now and give you just the biggest hug, because I know this was with intention to help everyone out there, but today you helped me, but I know that you are helping others, and everything you've said today was so valuable, and I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for everything you said today.
Thank you so much, Gabby. It's an honor to be here. There's always so much more to say, but in this time frame, I think that was enough. Thank you.
We are so grateful to you, Gabby, and Isabel, thank you so much for being a part of this series and for sharing all of this with us. Gabby, I think you probably understand so well about how important it is to write and how writing is so cathartic. You have such good information, and the things that you write on your blog and that you share on Facebook are tremendous. Thank you for doing that. And as much as it helps us, I'm sure it helps you as well.
Absolutely. Writing that is my therapy. And while I put things out on the Hospice Heart about what I'm feeling so that others can resonate, it's equally as therapeutic for me to just express it, to admit that I am human, I am vulnerable, I have weaknesses, I have fears, I cry, and when I experience loss, I grieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, we want to thank you. Helen and I want to thank you for being here today and sharing this with us. This is actually the first episode where we have our subject matter experts here. And next week, we're going to be talking with Lisa Paul. And then, Isabel, we're going to have you back in 2 weeks for our episode 3 to talk about children and grief. So we look forward to that. Helen, any last words that you would like to share with us?
No, I just feel like I'm soaking up all the good wisdom.
That's right. That's right. So thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for listening to Heartbeat from the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer with Jerry Finter. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and please take a minute to leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, you could send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.